Hi everyone, welcome back to the University of Guelph Arboretum. My name is Michelle and I'm the Summer Naturalist here at the Arboretum. And today we find ourselves in the last few weeks of August. Summer is starting to wind down, and I think there is no better way to celebrate the tail end of summer than by getting to know and exploring some of our summer wildflowers that we still have left. Wildflowers can be a tricky group of plants to get to know. I definitely will struggle with their identification, but today's video will involve going through some features and characteristics of a flower that should hopefully help you identify them with more ease in the future. So one thing you can definitely note when you're trying to identify a wildflower is noting the time of year that you're seeing it in bloom. So different plants will want to blossom at different times of the year, and that has to do with flowers that, that really beautiful thing that we see a plant make sometimes, like that goldenrod behind me. Those beautiful flowers are really just a precursor to seeds. The anatomy of certain flowers, it'll depend on the flower, of course, but they typically will have a male and female part. Each part of the flower will create a reproductive unit, and those two reproductive units need to meet in order for that flower to develop into seeds. So the female part of the flower will make an egg, and the male part of the flower will make pollen. And if the pollen meets the egg, then it fertilizes the egg and it can develop into a seed. And having this happen, producing seeds, can be resource costly for a plant. So certain plants might require very specific conditions in order to go into bloom and then create seeds. So conditions like the weather, rainfall, sunlight, temperature, these can all influence when a plant wants to go into bloom. Another thing you can note when you're trying to identify a wildflower is the location that you're seeing it. So all plants will prefer different environments to grow in. Some plants will want really swampy and wet conditions. Other plants might love the full sun of growing in an open field. And other plants might want to be tucked away in the shade of the understory of a forest. So considering the time of year and the location of the flower can help you narrow down the list of potential flowers this flower could be. So by narrowing down that list, you can make it a little bit easier on yourself to figure out which flower you're looking at. We can also take a note of specific characteristics that a flower, or really the plant, might have. So let's take a closer look at some of the flowers around me to get to know some of their characteristics. So one thing that you can note when you're looking at a plant and you're trying to identify the wildflower is actually the leaves of the plant. And there's a couple of things you can note. You can take a look at the arrangement. So how are the leaves placed on the stem, and the actual leaf itself. So for example, this milkweed, it isn't in bloom, but if we take a look at its leaves, they are opposite to another. So here's one leaf, there's the other one. This is called opposite leaf arrangement. And the leaf itself is entire, and the margins are completely smooth. So this is an entire leaf. This flower has divided leaves. So if we take a look at each leaf, they are divided into these little leaflets, and they're arranged alternately. So if we take a look along the stem of this flower, unlike the oppositely arranged leaves where you'd expect the next leaf to be right across from the last leaf, so there is no leaf right across from this one. Instead, it's above it and a little bit on a diagonal to it. So this is an alternately arranged leaf pattern. And if we look at the actual flower, they grow in clusters, and you can see they all meet at the same point. So they're all growing in clusters that join at the same point. And each flower, if we look really closely at it, has about 5 petals. Now, the symmetry of this flower is radially symmetric, meaning if you turn it at a center point, it should look like the same picture over and over again. So this flower has 5 petals and it's radially symmetric. This flower here looks a lot like the yarrow we just took a look at, but if we take a closer look at the flower, it is not radially symmetric, and that is because the flower parts, the petals, aren't all the same shape. So if we were to take a picture of one of the flowers and we try to turn it around its center point, it wouldn't continue to match itself up. And if we look along the stem of it, we'll find that just like the yarrow, it has leaves divided, but the shape of the leaves are different. And it also has alternate leaves. So this here is Queen's Anne lace, or wild carrot. Very similar to yarrow, but if you look at the actual flower, the shape of it is a little bit different. It also grows in a sort of cluster, so all those flower parts are growing out of the same spot, but the actual flower looks different. It's not radially symmetric. Its flower parts aren't all the same shape and size. Here we have Cultivar's root, and this flower is just coming out of bloom. Here we can see a couple white flowers left over. But what's notable, what I want to point out about this flower is its leaf arrangement. So it has a less common leaf arrangement, which is called whorled. And whorled leaves are arranged in groups. In this case, it's groups of 5 leaves around the stem of the flower. So here we can see 5 leaves encase the stem basically. And we can see that all along the stem of this flower. So this is what whorled leaves look like. This flower also lacks radial symmetry. So if we look at the flowers, the petals, they aren't all the same shape and size. And so it is not radially symmetric. And if we look down towards its leaves, we can see that they are divided and alternately arranged. So this here is bird's foot trefoil. It's a pretty common flower to grow in fields, and a very cute one in my opinion. Another characteristic you can look at when you're looking to identify a wildflower is the color. So if we take a look at our handy biodiversity sheet, this one is on wildflowers, summer wildflowers, and it's one of the many sheets that the University of Guelph Arboretum produces and sells. And when we took a look at that sheet, we could see there's a huge array of beautiful colors that wildflowers come in. So maybe noting a really unique and distinctive color of a flower can be a great way to identify that wildflower. But I will warn you that using color as the main thing that you use to identify a flower can be a bit tricky. And that has to do with the fact that color is very subjective. And when we look at this biodiversity sheet, we can notice that a lot of these flowers share similar colors. So there's, on this side of the sheet, there are a lot of flowers that are yellow. So one thing that you can do is use multiple pieces of that plant to identify it. So thinking about the leaf arrangement and the leaf types, the type of flower and its symmetry, and the location and time of year it's blooming, by thinking of all those characteristics, you can come to a pretty solid ID. You might also want to use a field guide. So I've been using the Newcomb's Field Guide, and I really recommend it. It's an awesomely made tool for identifying wildflowers. And so using as many resources as you can come across to help you learn wildflowers is an awesome way to get to know them a little bit more. One tip I've been given that I've really liked is getting to know flowers that you might already know. So if you know this is a goldenrod, and maybe you know the type of goldenrod this plant is, taking a look at its features and characteristics, the type of leaves and its arrangement, all those things, and really considering what makes this that specific goldenrod. And then practicing on those flowers that you already know so that you can have some practice at using characteristics of a plant to identify it before you move on to plants that you might not know at all. So hopefully those tips and tricks can help you identify wildflowers in the future. This plant here is a really good example of why it's important to look at multiple pieces of a plant to determine its ID. Because if we first look at the flower, it looks a lot like dandelion. It's yellow and it will look very much like a dandelion flower, especially as it continues to bloom. But this isn't actually dandelion. So if we continue to look down the stem of this plant, we'll notice that it has leaves along its stem. And dandelions will typically only have basal leaves. Now, basal leaves are something that most plants will have. Those are just the bottom leaves on the stem. And so in dandelion, we typically would only see basal leaves. But on this plant, this is a field sow thistle, we can see leaves all along the stem. What's also interesting about this plant is how the leaf type. So it's similar to a toothed leaf, where there are little indentations along the margin of the leaf. But this one is actually a lobed leaf because those indentations go really deep into the leaf. So this plant has lobed leaves. It has leaves arranged in an alternate formation along its stem. And it looks a lot like dandelion, but it isn't quite that. This is probably a familiar flower to many people. But let's take a look at some of its characteristics. So if we look at the stem of the flower, we'll notice that the leaf arrangement is alternate. And if we take a look at each leaf, we'll notice that its margins aren't smooth. There's little edgings. So this is a toothed leaf. And if we look at the actual flower, we'll notice it does have radial symmetry. It has multiple petals. It's a beautiful yellowy orange color. So when we put together all of those characteristics, this is a black-eyed Susan flower. A very common flower here in the Arboretum and a very beautiful find. Alrighty, well, I hope you guys enjoyed getting to know some of the wildflowers that are still around here at the Arboretum. I definitely invite you guys to take a stroll maybe in the Arboretum or your neighborhood green space and trying to find and identify the wildflowers that you might find. I hope you guys will join me next week for another video, and I'll see you then.